Okay, we're going to start reasonably soon, so, be ready. And where did Will go? There he is. Okay. I think some more people are going to filter in, but I'm going to start anyway. Okay, so this is the book we're here to talk about, Losing Big by Jonathan D. Cohen. I'm going to put it over here because I can't hold the book and my notes at the same time. And welcome and thanks for coming. I'm Nick Lemann. I'm the director. Oh, sorry. I'm the director of Columbia Global Reports, which is a publishing house here at Columbia that is the publisher of this book and many other books. I think this is our 52nd book. Is that right? So we're almost 10 years old. We publish, relatively compact books. Usually based on original reporting from all over the world, sometimes based on original thinking, more than reporting. But these are, short books on a very wide variety of topics that are meant to be non-replicative of what you read in the paper every day and kind of out ahead of what people are thinking about, surfacing big issues that need more attention than they're currently getting, and this book is a prime example of that. I want to welcome our panelists. Well, I want to first welcome, we have a few people from the Columbia's 1754 Society. Thanks for coming. You guys come to, not you specifically, but 1754 folks come to every event we have, and we're pleased to have you. I want to make clear that we're a not-for-profit book publisher, so none of this would be possible without the generous help of many of our friends, some individual, some institutional. After we finish with the panel, we're going to sell books at the back table, and John will stay a few extra minutes to sign them upon request. Okay, so I'll just introduce everybody and say a little bit about how we do these events. We try to have kind of loose and free-flowing events around our books. So I'll moderate, I'll pose questions to our distinguished panelists, but they won't be reading little papers that they've written. They'll be answering, and I hope they'll start arguing or at least interrupting with each other. And then when we're about 15 minutes from the end, we'll open up to audience questions and comments and answer them. So John is somebody I knew because we've worked very closely together in another compartment of both of our lives. He's a program officer at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Cambridge, Mass., of which I am a busy member. But for reasons that we may surface soon, he has a special interest in gambling, even though it's not his day job. And
or my vice of choice.
Yeah, and his previous book is about state lotteries. By training, he's a historian. Dr. Silvia Martins is director of the Substance Use Epidemiology Unit of the Department of Epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health here at Columbia, and of the Policy and Health Initiatives on Opioids and Other Substances Interdisciplinary Group. She's co-authored more than 250 peer-reviewed epidemiological and substance use articles. Will Ma, at the end, is the Roderick H. Cushman Associate Professor of Decision Risk and Operations at Columbia Business School. His research centers around online algorithms in e-commerce systems. He also has miscellaneous experience as a professional poker player, video game startup founder, and karaoke bar pianist. Okay, so John, let's start with just where did this book come from? How did you decide you wanted to ask us to publish a book about this?
Yeah, I mean, it really started in my last book that you mentioned on the state lottery system, and which came out in 2022. But then in 2018, as I'm sure we'll discuss, was the Supreme Court decision that opened the floodgates for legalized sports gambling in the U.S. And I'm a good interview subject. Like, you have me on your show or your interview for the newspaper, I know you're going to ask about all sorts of gambling policy, and so I sort of kept my eye on developments in the world of gambling from the Supreme Court decision. And I would say around 2022, I wasn't the only one making this realization at this time, but it seemed like something was off. It seemed like something weird was happening with sports gambling. Lots of people were saying...
Wait, I'm going to interrupt you already because you skated by the words "the Supreme Court decision" as if we all know what you're talking about, but we may not. So what's the Supreme...
Surely this Columbia University are full of esteemed Supreme Court scholars who know all these things. Yeah.
But there's a lot of Supreme Court decisions. So what is, for our purposes with this book, the Supreme Court decision?
So the reason this book is possible, the reason we have sports gambling today, and the reason it feels so new and suddenly ubiquitous, is that in 2018, the Supreme Court overturned a 1992 law that wasn't actually making sports gambling illegal, but the 1992 law was preventing states from legalizing sports gambling. So on the basis of states' rights under the 10th Amendment, the Supreme Court overturned that law and allowed states to legalize sports gambling. So it's not the law of the land, but states are now able to legalize it if they want to, and 38 this year, 39, actually maybe this year 40, have done so. So that is what happened while I was doing the press tour for my last book that sort of opened the floodgates in the first place.
Okay. So after the floodgates, now the floodgates have been open for a while, so what does the flood look like?
Yeah, so I mean, for a lot of people, it looked like ads on TV. That was sort of their exposure and their understanding, and their sort of the first time. And talking to other people, they felt the same way. That it felt like something was amiss, and that it felt like something weird was happening in sports or in culture. And I sort of had the same sense. And there wasn't the data that we have now, and the data we have now isn't even that good about gambling addiction, about financial insecurity from gambling. But it sure seemed like something was happening in American society that was worth investigating, and what better, sort of writing the book was sort of an excuse to look into it and to find out what was going on and if something in fact was amiss.
So how big an industry is this? Who are the main players? Just give us the sort of overview of online sports gambling.
So as I said, there are 40, this year there will be 40, maybe 39 states that have online sports gambling. Americans are going to gamble on sports around $120 billion over the course of the year, which is a lot of money, but you get around 90% of every dollar you bet on sports back and winning, so it doesn't equate to end up being that much. But the two players, and we can talk about sports books and sports betting companies, but fundamentally we're talking about the two companies, DraftKings and FanDuel, that have 80+% of the American market share. And these started as daily fantasy sports companies back in the 2010s, and are now are basically a duopoly at the center of the industry.
Who owns them?
They're publicly traded companies. FanDuel is owned by Flutter, which is an Irish corporation. DraftKings is based in Boston and was founded in Boston in, I think, 2012, and again was founded as a daily fantasy sports company that is now more so a sports gambling company.
So, as one who doesn't gamble on sports or anything else, what is the life like for somebody who is really into this? When do they do it? How do they do it? Is it just home-based? Is it social? Who are these people?
Yeah, it depends on the person. And I happen to know there's a professional sports bettor sitting in the back of the room, which is, there's gradations to all these things. But I think the most sort of common experience is someone just watching sports, just like in the way that they used to watch sports, and they just now have their phone on and their phone open while they're watching it, and they're betting it while they're watching. Or my brother-in-law reported that he was at Madison Square Garden for a Knicks game, and every conversation of every person in the crowd around him was like, "Oh, I need Josh Hart to get one more rebound so I can hit my parlay." It's just sort of taken over the culture around sports, which is true for a lot of people, and most bettors are able to play safely, and it's just part of their sports watching experience is now betting on sports. And then again, there's gradations up until professional bettors whose behavior actually looks a lot like addicted gamblers, but we can talk about, maybe Will's better qualified to talk about that. Yeah.
Silvia, why isn't this just a fabulous, wonderful part of American life that wasn't available to people just a few years ago?
So this isn't a fabulous part of American life because gambling can be addictive. So gambling can be addictive like other substances, like alcohol, cannabis, opioids. Like we usually say that gambling, problem gambling or gambling disorder is a behavioral addiction. So before sports betting, in all epidemiological studies conducted in the U.S. and in other countries, we see that about like 0.5% to 3% of the people could develop like a gambling disorder, which is a clinical gambling addiction, and a little bit more problem gambling. But when we look at online gambling, and particularly like sports betting, we see like in different societies that about like from 5 to 20% of the people that gamble online on sports can develop gambling problems and eventually gambling disorder. So that means that their lives revolve around gambling. They have problems in their lives. They're always all the time chasing the losses, and that they lose control of their lives. Like if you imagine somebody like with a substance addiction, it's very, very similar.
So I as one who doesn't do addiction for a living, think of addiction as there's a physical addiction to a substance. But that's not this. So how is it addictive? Do you have an actual physical craving?
Yes, you do. We have an actual physical craving. Like we have changes in the brain, particularly like in the frontal lobe. Usually people gamble for two reasons, like either for boredom or for risk taking. So usually when you see like that adolescent that is risk taker, one thing that people that work on prevention try to do is like, let's make these adolescents focus on other types of activities. So get involved in sports, but being the one that is playing the sports, not gambling on sports. Getting involved in drama, getting involved in other activities, but so to avoid risk, it's a form of risk taking activity. So usually people with an impulsive personality will do that, or try to channel them, like for example, to work in sciences, get something that sparks their interest, because initially gambling and sports betting sparks a person's interest, and then their lives become revolved around it. Yeah.
Sounds scary. Well,
as it is.
Have you ever personally gambled on sports?
I haven't personally gambled on sports, but I used to be a professional poker player. And actually, I think as a poker player, we had a very good dichotomy between addiction and not addiction. And admittedly, I've been addicted at times. But basically, I think of it as, when does poker or sports betting go from a good thing to a bad thing, right? It's like a good thing if it's just I'm recreationally watching my favorite team. I want to cheer for them, and I want to also get a prize if they win. So I'll wager some money, I watch the game, I fully enjoy the game, but I'm mostly in it for watching the game. I'm not in it for the money, basically, or the money is like some added icing on the cake. In my mind, be it poker or sports betting, the time when it becomes addiction is when I start betting on games I don't even care about, right? In the book, John talks about people betting on some B league,
minor league British darts.
Yeah, right. Like that's when clearly you're betting it just for the thrill of winning money back that you've lost. And in poker, this does manifest also, where at the beginning I'm trying to enjoy the game, think through my decisions, and then sort of when I become addicted is when I'm just trying to gamble and get my winnings back, and not even thinking or enjoying sort of the decision-making aspect.
For those of us who don't gamble, just be a little more specific about how does this work, actually. I'm interested in what you're not just betting on who's going to win or lose the game, you're betting on more like the equivalent of derivatives in markets. And what are you feeling as you're betting?
Yeah, so I think actually one thing that made sports betting way more addictive, sort of in conjunction with the online movement, is the fact that you can bet during the game. So, I think if it was just I can bet once before the game starts on my favorite team and then watch the team and cheer for the team and have financial reason, that's I would say a healthier form, because I forget about betting after. But now it's basically like there's always things you can bet on, like who scores the next point. You can bet on like, you know, what color like the Gatorade's going to be on the Super Bowl winning coach and stuff like that. So it's just like you're constantly able to bet on things. And generally, you know, I guess, okay, as a former professional gambler, if I'm gambling on things, I'm doing it to try to, you could say, beat the house, or betting when I think the odds are in my favor. But in a lot of these decisions, you have to make them so quick, and it's very arbitrary. I have no idea what are even the different colors of Gatorade, right? So it's kind of just like the thrill of betting on all these things and chasing your losses.
Yeah. And people who develop problems, they no longer think strategically. Like they are just betting for the thrill and chasing their losses. Like so, they have kind of a dopamine rush, and they continue betting. And even if they lose, they continue betting. And then you can have like financial problems, like problems with your mortgage, problems with your family, problems in your work, yeah. And a lot of sports bettors, like nowadays, like sports bettors, particularly online gamblers, like now it's more prevalent, like among like young adults, so from ages 18 to 30, and male young adults. So that's where we see it's most common. But of course, like we need more studies because that's something that it's very hard to get funding for this type of research, especially nowadays. Yeah.
Now that we have a casino owner president, so it's among many other things one could say about him. So I guess a lot of things to ask, but one is, what is it about 18 to 30-year-old males that makes them the sort of core group for gambling?
Well, first of all, if you think from a neurobiological perspective, like adolescents, nowadays, like, so for example, anybody that studies the brain, we know that adolescence goes up like to age 25, and the brain is still developing up to age 25. So in that, adolescence is also the period of life where we're more impulsive, where we see the highest levels of impulsivity. And men are more attracted to sports and sports gambling. So that is something that attracts them. And if they have like high impulsivity traits, that's what will that's why we see it more in this population. And of course it's online. Like older people are not as savvy online as younger people nowadays.
I'll add some cultural economic conditions too, in terms of young men in the United States, for example. At the highest income levels, men are still out earning women, but at every other part of the income spectrum, women are out earning men. Have higher.
I gamble, I can catch up to women.
Right. I mean, yeah, or you know, have higher rates. Women have higher rates of higher education enrollment. So young men, even across the globe, even outside of these sort of adverse, call them economic or educational circumstances, have a documented appetite for risk and risky behaviors that manifest, I would say, in sports betting. I would also say you see basically the same phenomenon with cryptocurrency trading, with Wall Street, with options trading and stock trading. It's basically manifestation of the same thing, and in sports betting in many ways is just a symptom of this broader disease, let's say, of economic, it's not quite insecurity. It's like one level up from insecurity. It's sort of like they have enough money to like get by, but not enough money that they can like buy a house or pay off their student loans or start a small business. So it's like, okay, if I'm not gonna be able to do these things and sort of pursue the traditional American dream, then what's the point of saving? Might as well invest it and bet on a $15,000 parlay that might give me a chance of doing all these things that are sort of being denied to me by the structures of the economy.
So let's say if we've talked about, 18 to 30-year-old men. What are like 3 other things I could tell you about a person that if you knew them, you'd know that they were at higher risk for gambling?
So let me add, I think one important thing I guess you could say is correlated potentially with men is like being overconfident. I think like a lot of betting is when, I'm like, the book only thinks the Yankees are 60% to win. That's like my favorite team. I think they're definitely way more than 60% to win, and that's when I bet money on it. So I think being sort of very overconfident that you as one person can kind of beat the house with like a team of analysts trying to figure out the odds of each team winning, I think that's like an important feature that entices someone to bet on sports.
Is there a certain educational level or income level or geography Is there, vicious stereotypes about guys who live in their parents' basement? Are those true?
Yeah, I mean,
Marital status.
Well, like all gambling, you need to have disposable income. So lottery play, for example, is disproportionately concentrated not in the bottom quintile of income, but in the second and third quintile, because you have enough disposable income, but not so much that, again, you're going to buy a house. I think I would guess this is now going to be concentrated in like the third and fourth quintile of income for young men. Again, disposable income, but not so much that they're going to pay off their student loan or buy a house. It is, I would say there are some features that there's not enough research on this yet, but like there is evidence that Black and Latino young men are disproportionately inclined to play, and then those who do play are disproportionately inclined to bet more, or to have an even more overconfidence, as Will was saying, that they are going to win and that they can make money. But those are sort of that's polling data. There's not full indications of that just yet.
And also people living in urban areas than in more rural areas. So I would add that. So that is more or less like the
Will,
demographics.
is there a way to be a good gambler or a responsible gambler? What are the rules to avoid sort of falling into the abyss?
So I would say, okay, let me distinguish good and responsible. So I think, definitely there's, you could say, strategies for, being good at figuring out odds. So I guess one change that happened was there is a difference between daily fantasy sports, where you're playing against other players. The house takes a fixed cut, but if I'm sort of just the best among the 100 players playing that contest at picking out who's going to score the touchdown or whatever, I could presumably actually make money. But for things like you're betting on events where the house has a team of analysts sort of analyzing what are the probabilities, and often the what's called the spread, like kind of the difference between betting on the two sides is sort of so large that it's very difficult to win money in that case. Yeah, so I would say in that case, it's probably very difficult to make money unless you can beat the house. But in the first case, there is a notion of being good and beating other players. Responsible, I would say, is different in that, you can be good and irresponsible, where you're only making a bit of money, but you use that as an excuse to not sleep at night and not do your day job. And, you can be losing money, but still responsible, just losing a bit at a time.
Is it better to sort of promise yourself exactly how much you're going to gamble? Is it better to always quit when you're ahead? Are there any rules here?
So I think I always try to pre-promise myself, but the reality is when you're in the moment, and this is what Silvia was talking about with like the chasing losses, it's very difficult to get yourself to stop, and I'll often lose more than my preset amount. I guess one personal opinion I have that maybe differs a bit from the book is that I think self-exclusion mechanisms are actually a good thing, where some of these websites, I think, allow you to set a hard limit on how much you can lose before I start playing and get into sort of the mindset and try to like get into the thrill of chasing losses. And I think that's can be personally helpful for a lot of people.
The problem is that at the point when somebody has already developed gambling problems, it's very hard for them like to self-exclude themselves, and it's very hard for them to stay within a limit. They usually won't stay within that. They need then professional help.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about the companies yet, and we can. But this is I like self-exclusion. The problem is that the tools that currently exist to let people limit their betting and be responsible bettors are all optional. And the way that you have to sign up for self-exclusion by yourself, you can, exactly as you said, when I log into DraftKings, if I lose more than $2,000, you need to cut me off. But like, why is someone who's still figuring out what it means that the Milwaukee Bucks are minus 115? Like, it's not reasonable to expect that they're going to like, in advance of gambling, set a limit for themselves when they're still figuring out what gambling is. And like, why would anyone set a limit on themselves for anything? That's not what the internet's for. The internet's for to do the exact opposite. So this is why, from a regulatory perspective, why I think some of these controls are needed externally, which we can talk about. But
yeah, I want to get to that now. Before we go to that, in the book, there's some really moving, sad stories about, individual people who got in trouble. So could you tell us about a couple of those people and what it feels like to sort of go down, off the cliff as an online sports gambler?
Yeah, so I profiled two people. They're both young men. Young white men. One who started betting in Colorado, and then lost all his money and moved back with his parents in Kansas. Another one who is in Connecticut. I'll talk about him actually because I think there are elements of his story that are sort of interesting, which is he started betting when gambling was still illegal. Like first with a bookie that he met through a friend of his. Then he lost $100,000, owed $100,000 to his bookie, couldn't pay it. The bookie cut him off. Started betting online illegally in these illegal casinos that are based in most of them in the Caribbean. Lost a whole bunch of money again. Started gambling. Like textbook unsafe gambling in the way that Silvia and Will have been describing. But then FanDuel, lo and behold, sort of legalized gambling in Connecticut in March of 2022, March 2021. And his unsafe gambling with FanDuel was exactly the same as all of his unsafe gambling with these offshore online casinos. And they, in fact, paired him with a VIP host to ensure his sort of brand loyalty to FanDuel, and he just lost all his money. And Silvia already alluded to this, but he missed a bunch of mortgage payments, and that's how his parents found out that he lost all his money. And this is an addiction that's going to be with him now for the rest of his life.
Any hope?
Yeah. I'm still in touch with him, and both of the guys I talked to are really hopeful. They are very quick to, as many of the gamblers and problem gamblers I talked to take personal responsibility for elements of their thing, which I actually think is smart because it gives them some empowerment. And if they can take personal responsibility over the development of their addiction, then maybe they can take personal responsibility over their recovery too. We can talk about the regulatory side.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
I know. I think that they deserve blame or fault, or only to an extent, and I think see that too, that they were sort of tricked, or the road down this rabbit hole was sort of paved for them, or was lubricated, and they were sort of able to slide down more easily because of the design of the apps and the arrival of it online so quickly. So there's definitely hope. The gambling, Silvia would know this better than me, is the addiction with the highest correlation to suicide. So just the fact that they are still alive, and one of them had thoughts of suicide over the course of his addiction, but did not take any action on them. I think they both feel lucky to have gone through, at least for now, the other side of the addiction.
I'd just like to add, there is hope. If they get professional help, if they get treatment, it's also very, very common, for somebody that gets better, from problem gambling, to develop a different type of addiction. Or so, for example, you stop gambling, but then you start using substances, and then a few years later, you are addicted to cocaine, for example. So you have to keep an eye on that. And it's also very, very common that people also have comorbid psychiatric disorders, such as depression and anxiety. So that can be treated. So they can be treated via therapy and also via some medications that are used for both substance use disorders and psychiatric disorders.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the world of data and algorithms and how the companies use that to suture the users, to the system.
So I guess my research in general is trying to sort of, not with us sports betting companies, but in general with say Amazon, trying to figure out based on your past data what to recommend to you, and when you check out a product, what type of delivery preferences you might want, and how to optimize things like the delivery. But you can imagine so John talked about there are human people who really try to nudge you and give you bonuses. But you can also automate a lot of this with algorithms that basically just based on your past behavior. But not only that, it has data on you, and it has so much data on everybody on the platform, and it can kind of pool this data and maybe find people who are similar to you, and their past data can also be used to, like the others' past data, can also be used to predict your future behavior. So it's generally very powerful to do it even algorithmically, to sort of figure out who the problem gamblers are and even like target them. Like, your account is getting low on money. Let's like try to entice you to deposit more. Try to figure out, you can try to learn when someone's payday is and send them deposit bonuses right after the payday.
Okay. Do any of these companies lend money to the gamblers?
This is a huge differentiation between the black market and the legal market. Is the reason so many people still bet with bookies, even though it's obviously more convenient to bet with FanDuel, is bookies will let you bet on credit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the point. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I would say they break your kneecaps if you don't pay, which FanDuel and DraftKings won't do. But that's the only difference.
Yeah. The point I was going to say, though, is a lot of these like personalization algorithms that target users in a specific way, they're kind of like black box. You can call it AI, the new buzzword, if you will. Like it's fairly black box. To my general understanding, there's not well-established simple rules for how to kind of do this. So usually like the product of the optimization or the AI, if you will, at the company will be a very uninterpretable algorithm that just arbitrarily decides who gets deposit bonuses. And, it's very arbitrary. And, even if you're going to try to do something that tries to identify problem gamblers and prevent them from depositing, it's also very difficult to sort of explain why the algorithm identified me, let's say, as a problem gambler. So all this is to say, I don't really study regulation, but it's generally difficult to study to regulate these algorithms because they're already so uninterpretable in the first place.
Okay, so let's pivot to what do we do about this? I mean, I'm gathering that none of you would say we don't need to do anything because we don't have a problem. So if we do have a problem, what can be done to make things better? And I'd like to hear from all three of you about that.
Okay, I have an answer that I wrote in the book that I would have given you until like a month ago, and then I have an answer, a completely different answer based on the events of the last 6 weeks.
So I have to publish a second edition.
Okay. Yeah, I'll call you. Okay, so I think there's three things, or I guess I have three answers, but again, one is like what I wrote in the book, one is based on the events of the last 6 weeks, and then one is something that we can do anyway that is sort of evergreen. So I got yelled at my last event for leaving on a despondent note and not giving anything hopeful. So what I wrote in the book is sort of what Will is describing, which is regulating not on the company side because they have these sort of black box softwares, but really on the player side. So, if you deposit money into your account, you have to wait 24 hours before you can bet with it. So you can't chase your losses. You can limit the amount of advertising, or lots of countries, for example, don't allow gambling advertising during sporting events so that children don't get exposed. Sort of nice sounding regulatory tweaks like that. So that's what I would have said, and that's what I recommend in the book, and there's a whole long menu of ideas like that. And then 6 weeks ago, Kalshi, the prediction market platform, partnered with Robinhood to offer a prediction market on the NCAA tournament. Basically, effectively, I can get into details of sports contracts and prediction markets, but they basically are offering sports betting in all 50 states, even without state regulation or without the state level regulatory infrastructure that is in place on the sports books on FanDuel and DraftKings. So at this point, I'm just like willing to throw up my hands and be like, oh no, like we're screwed, because they're like the genie's out of the bottle, and these companies that are even less regulated, like FanDuel and DraftKings lobbied and bought a bunch of cigars for lawmakers and did all sorts of shady stuff to get the rules written for what they wanted. But at least they went to the legislators and went to the regulators and got the rules passed and got the laws passed in the first place. And these new companies are just claiming, oh, we're regulated by the Commodities Future Trading Commission. Oh, yeah, just so happens that one of our board members is on the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. We don't have to answer to your regulators anymore. So at this point, I'm fearful that DraftKings and FanDuel, in a matter of months or years, are going to look benevolent and benign compared to these basically unregulated competitors who might about to eat their lunch. And then my last answer, that is...
So in the next edition of the book, you're going to say it's hopeless.
Yeah, losing
let's stick
everything.
With this
yeah.
edition then.
And then there's one evergreen answer, which is sort of doesn't actually have to do anything with policy, which is sort of on the cultural side, which is, there are lots of parents, and I talk to high school teachers and parents who let their kids use their apps, or they dads will watch football with their kids and they bet together. And it's like, okay, we need some public campaign or some denormalization of gambling in that way, particularly for children. And then let's call it a destigmatization of gambling addiction in the way that we've, within the last few decades, destigmatized drug addiction or alcohol addiction, so that people know to come forward and know to, and we sort of culturally are able to get these people help more easily than we do now.
So to add on what John said, I think we really need prevention, and prevention that starts early. So there is research showing that we shouldn't start preventing like any type of addiction, so substance use disorder or gambling addiction, only in high schools. We need to start that prevention with kids that are in middle school. So there is a team at McGill in Canada, because Canada also has a big gambling problem, not just sports gambling, but gambling everywhere, that they have like developed prevention programs that you can start using like as early as a sixth grade, middle school, or even late elementary school. So educating both the children and the parents, and identifying kids that are at risk. So sensation seekers, high impulsive kids, and as I mentioned earlier, like gearing them towards like activities where they will feel the thrill, but that will be beneficial for them. Like, so risky sports or science or a drama, anything unrelated. Yeah, anything else. And that works. The problem is that is expensive, and that is where like there isn't that many money. So not all schools like have prevention programs like for substance use disorder and mental health, and very few of them incorporate prevention of gambling problems.
Well,
yeah, one thing I'll add, I think you talk about it in the book a bit, is like just sort of how dangerous it is that you can keep betting on things like the potato chip effect, where you're watching the game, and now it's not just you could bet on who wins the game, you can bet on who scores the next point, and you can do this throughout the whole game. I think a simple rule it's probably easier said than done, is to just ban any kind of betting after the game starts. This is how sports betting worked in the old days before we had sort of all these fancy phone platforms.
It's like when you go to the racetrack and they close the betting window right before the bell.
Right, exactly. Like in some sense, you could say things were way less addictive 30 years ago when, there weren't phones, and it wasn't the fact that you can just keep betting on the game.
What does the political space around this issue look like? Obviously, you've got the companies lobbying, but what do politicians think? Or is it on their radar screen? Are there gambling control interest groups that are significant? What's all that like?
Yes to all of the above. Congress can't do anything, but there is a bill in front of Congress to sort of really strongly regulate and clamp down on the industry. And because Congress doesn't do anything, and also because of the lobbying of the American Gaming Association, it's not going to pass. I would say after 2018, after the Supreme Court decision, these companies and their lobbyists really caught the industry, caught regulators, especially states that have like part-time legislatures. They were just caught completely flat-footed. These lobbyists come in, they know a lot about sports gambling. You're like a farmer, or you're a lawyer, and like 6 months a year you go to the state capitol and you're a legislature. You don't know anything about sports gambling, and then all of a sudden they're like waving a bunch of money at you, or waving a bunch of money for the state and saying, oh, this is gonna be great. Create all this tax revenue for the state without any taxes. You might as well pay for it, or you might as well pass it. And now, a couple of years later, I think we're seeing a little bit of buyer's remorse, and states as politically diverse as Kansas and Maine and Iowa, sort of wondering what exactly they've gotten themselves into. Whether it's they want to increase the tax rate, and they're saying, oh, you're actually making way more money than we are, or than we thought we're making less money as a state than we thought we would, or like, hey, you let the advertising genie way out of the bottle, way too fast, way too far, and we need to sort of rein it back in. So I'm not going to promise that it's going to pass tomorrow or anything's going to happen soon, but there is a little bit of a come to Jesus moment by these states about what exactly is happening.
Let me just say we're just about at the time when we're going to start going interactive with you guys. So be thinking of questions you'd like to ask, and we'll bring a mic to you. We're being filmed by Book TV, so they're going to really kill me if I don't make sure each questioner speaks into a mic, because then the vast global audience for this event won't hear you. So just wait for the mic. Do you want to ask a question? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm not a gambler, but I am a journalist, and I wanted to ask, and this is for anybody who feels like answering, have any of you looked at American Indian casinos? Every time I'm on Metro North and I see an ad for Monhegan Sun, I remember, they have the biggest liberal pack. I've been out west a lot, and I've seen reservations transformed by gambling income. Have they embraced sports betting, and what do you think of that?
I would say it's so this is a function of that Supreme Court decision where it's really state by state. I live in Connecticut, and in Connecticut, which is one of only a few states that has not just online sports betting, but online casino gaming. So you can play slots or blackjack, roulette, like on your phone, and it is through the licenses for the sports books are in partnership with the local tribal casinos. So I think FanDuel is with DraftKings, and Mohegan Sun is with. They're sort of licensed through them, but that's rare. I would say in most states. So tribal casinos were one of many stepping stones for legal sports gambling. We got legalized bingo, then we got legal lotteries, then we got tribal casinos, then we got non-tribal casinos, then we got online lottery, then we got daily fantasy sports, and then we got sports betting. But again, it depends on the states. So in California, the FanDuel and DraftKings in 2022 tried to pass a measure that ran around the tribes and was basically going to cut them out. And then the tribes just flexed their political muscles, and got it killed. In Colorado, same thing. They sort of went around the tribes, and now the tribes are suing actually for the right to get licenses that they feel they were denied when the state set up sports betting. So it depends on the state, and also the experience, and maybe we'll speak more to this, of like in-person casino is problematic and can attract gambling addiction and all sorts of other things. But I think it's in many ways fundamentally different from sitting on your couch, like building a 50-1 parlay or whatever on the Knicks game, just because, like in a potato chip effect, to his words.
Do you all want to add on this?
Yeah, so I guess partly to answer your question and partly related to, is there hope, is that at least in casinos I have seen, I'm not saying every casino does this, and I think some of it is from regulation, is there's a person whose job is to look at people who have been playing the slot machine for like 16 hours in a row and be like, hey, here's a voucher to have a free hotel night stay and a free nice breakfast. Like, go take some rest, stop playing slot machines. I think this type of intervention is easier in casinos. So in that sense, it's a lot less addictive. In terms of, is there hope? It's like, I've even heard arguments, I don't know the math on whether this is true, but I've even heard arguments that the casinos could even be doing this out of self-interest, because you're kind of not skinning the sheep, right? If you don't let that person go to ruin playing slots, that they could come back every week and lose a small amount of their paycheck, and that actually could be better for them and better for you. That being said, also, maybe they're just trying to sort of avoid these terrible stories that could end up in suicide and a lot of things like this.
That doesn't happen in all casinos. Yeah, I personally don't think like the casinos are thinking that much about like the person that's there gambling. No, they're not thinking about their well-being. No.
More, sir.
I was wondering why Will chose to give up professional poker play.
Thanks for asking. I mean, it honestly was not. I mean, I think it wasn't the funnest career. I think being. I mean, sorry if this is a cliche
it's not like
political
being a business
answer,
school professor.
But being an academic, I think, is a lot more fulfilling in some sense. Is the short answer. I think the thrill is nice for a bit, but it's not what I particularly enjoy. So I actually played mostly online poker, which is, in some sense, a more addictive form of poker. You could play all the time. And I remember many nights staying up the whole night and, destroying my health to keep playing. And I don't think it's the best lifestyle, even if you do it correctly.
Sir.
Good evening. The various sports leagues around the world, whether it's minor league darts or the NBA, they love online gambling because people get excited about watching and they're more engaged. If you put on your academic and futurist hats on, is there a point where these leagues go, uh-oh, this is actually bad for us and bad for our business?
Yeah, and I think it's sooner than you think. Yeah.
He has a chapter on this in
Yeah.
the book.
I think it's sooner than you think. I think after the Supreme Court decision, once sports gambling was going to be legal, it was inevitable that the leagues were basically going to do a complete 180 and spend after reverse decades of saying they oppose gambling to now trying to make as much money off of it as they can. The problem is the implication of let's take the FanDuel tagline of "Make every moment more." Is that the implication of that is that sports on its own is boring, and that the only way to make sports actually interesting is to gamble on sports. And so in the short term, these companies are relying on gambling, and especially when California and Texas legalize sports gambling, so the market size is going to effectively double, to keep their revenue arrow pointed upwards. Studies show that if you bet on a game, even if the result of the game has been decided, you're more likely to keep watching because you have money on the outcome. But the leagues are relying on gambling again right now to keep their viewership up, to keep their revenue pointed upwards. But over the long term, you're just creating a generation of people who aren't actually basketball fans. They're betting on basketball fans without any attachment to basketball, and they might as well be watching Malaysian women's doubles badminton at 3 a.m, which is legal to bet on in Colorado. So what's the point? Like, I don't know, maybe buy stock in Malaysian women's doubles badminton leagues because it's going to be as popular as the NBA in 5 years because it's all about gambling. It's not about the actual viewership and like the love of the game. I'm not naive that like our super corporatized NBA or culture is like super pure and all about love of sports. But like you can at least pretend it is, and it's going to be harder to do that when it's like really all about gambling.
As a follow-up to that, do the casinos, the bricks and mortar casinos, perceive online gambling as a threat to them? Because like, why go to Las Vegas if you can just stay home?
Yeah, this is why we only have 7 states that have online casino games, because there's a huge debate over the industry term is cannibalization as to whether the rise of online casino gambling will disrupt or take revenue away from tribal casinos or in-person casinos, which of course has implications not just for those companies, but also for jobs. So it's sort of a big political issue as to whether those casinos are going to, make as much money, keep as many people employed in their states. So there's a lot of evidence, and basically whoever you ask in the industry will give you whatever self-interested answer they want.
But you could have the industry having intramural battles, right?
You are right now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the opposition to the Missouri referendum that passed this past year to legalize online sports betting was opposed by Caesars and the in-state casino interests, sort of fearful of the disruption to their business.
We have a question over here.
Thank you. So I'm curious, you talked about this both in the book and on the panel, that sports betting is not actually that profitable for a lot of these companies, especially in places like New York with super high tax rates and lots of advertising spend. I was wondering if you could talk, and you just mentioned this, sort of the future where you see these companies going in terms of gambling, regulatory aspects of that as well. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, so when I started writing the book, one of the first conversations I had was with sort of an advocate in the problem gambling space, and he was basically like, "Yeah, you can write a book about sports betting, but it's like it's already done. Like they're using sports gambling in the way that they previously used daily fantasy sports to like get sports gambling passed. They're now just using sports gambling to build up a customer base and name recognition so that they can make money off of iCasinos, which are way more profitable. Sports gambling, you'd keep 10%, let's say, of the hold, and with online casinos, it could be like 90%, depending on how bad at gambling you are. And so that would be the foot in the door. So
Can you explain why that like for the gambler, why is sports gambling relatively less like you getting taken for a ride.
So theoretically, roughly half of sports bettors should win, right? You just almost by definition. And then there's a couple differences in online casino gaming, most particularly that it's not tethered to anything actually happening in the real world. So yeah, you can bet on Malaysian women's doubles badminton at 3 a.m. legally in some states, but like you can also just play blackjack, and you can play blackjack sort of like in the phenomenon that Will is describing. You can just like play it constantly at all hours of the day without any knowledge of sports, without any attachment to any real world event. And so it's casino games are in some cases more profitable on their own basis than sports gambling, but also it's the constancy and the speed and the access that make them more profitable. So I think, just to your question, that's sort of where things are going. From the companies, that's where they hope things are going. But it seems like from some of the states that I already mentioned that are trying to increase their tax rate, that regulatorily there might be some hurdles standing in their way.
I don't see any hands up. We're really close to the top of the hour, so let me just give everybody a chance to, one hand up, okay.
This is kind of an investment question. Which of these companies is going to mature out of the majors? And you mentioned they only have 80% market share. What about the others that have the other 20? Are they innovative, and do they basically return more to the bettor? And is that picked up by the bettors that they get better returns?
So there are some differences. I mean, some of that other rest of the market share is from even companies like Caesars or MGM, which are obviously sort of well-known and recognized in-person casino and entertainment companies that launched online sports books that just haven't sort of taken hold as well. Even ESPN has they don't run it, but it's sort of a branded ESPN sportsbook that has 2 to 3% of market share. So ideally, you're right. Like there should be more product differentiation than there is. But fundamentally, my sense is the companies are, with maybe one or two exceptions, all basically offering the same product and trying to compete on branding rather than trying to compete on out-innovating one another.
And how profitable are these companies in terms of return on investment and return on equity?
I don't know. From a stock price perspective, I'm not sure. But again, I guess I'll answer. They're getting more profitable because people are getting worse at betting. Because it used to be sort of like Will is describing, if you're just betting on the game and who's going to win the game, that's like the casino is going to take on average, a 10%, 11% hold, keep 10% of the margin. But the way people are choosing to bet, especially the young men that Silvia was talking about, where they're building parlays, which are these long, complicated sort of streams of bets all attached to one another, and the casino keeps like or the sportsbook keeps 30 to 40% of every dollar on that. So young men are getting worse at betting, which is resulting in a higher profit margin for sportsbooks than the previous generation.
You never mentioned women.
Yeah, well, who certainly are betting, but as Silvia would describe, I think Will said, sort of the overconfidence about sports in particular seems to be a phenomenon concentrated among young men.
Women usually bet more like in slot machines, and the research has shown, like research on gambling and problem gambling in the past has shown that women usually start gambling due to boredom, depression, and anxiety. So we see that different pathway for both men and women. Yeah. There might be some women that are sports betting, but there's a low proportion.
Let me just ask everybody, we're right at the end of our time, so if we could just come down the line, starting with you, Will, and back toward me with any parting thoughts for us.
Sure, yeah. I'll just close that. I think, like in my mind, these very real-time betting addictions, it's really a confluence of two problems. Like one is losing all your money, but the other is just, digital addiction that's not very different from TikTok. You can be addicted to TikTok, and in some sense, I view that also as a major problem, and sort of online sports betting combines sort of the two bad aspects, like being addicted to your phone and watching TikTok, but you're also losing all your money. But in some sense, the losing all your money is sort of also bringing more attention to this more broader, in my mind, digital addiction problem. And I view these as like major problems going forward.
So I think building on what Will said, I think we definitely need to think as a society that we need to invest on prevention and invest on prevention early, like particularly thinking about our next generation. Yeah, so invest on prevention and start preventing like digital addiction, problem gambling, and other related addictions like as early as middle school. Yeah.
I don't want to sound like one of those like political liberals who just like complains about everything and doesn't have any solutions. But like, I'll just say, I mean, I haven't said it
You
already.
have an abundant solution.
Yeah, right. I would say like when we haven't said it already, like gambling is fun and like gambling on sports is fun. And I think it should be legal, and not just because there's all these crazy sports prediction markets out there that are going to be legal whether we like it or not. And I think taking a sort of a prohibitionary stance is probably not productive and not helpful from a sort of marketing standpoint to reduce the harm that we want to reduce. But the word that I use in the title that was suggested by my editor in the back of the room is reckless, in that the way this was rolled out was reckless and caused more harm than it needed to from a regulatory standpoint. So again, sports betting can and should be legal, and it is fun, and I like to do it. It's just the way we've allowed it to unfold is the problem, not the product in and of itself necessarily.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. John, we're sending you right back to that table. And please buy a book, and he'll inscribe it for you and give you tips on what to gamble on as soon as you get home.
I like the Charlotte money line tomorrow night. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks a lot. And thanks to Will and Silvia for coming and helping, too.